I've always called myself a social and cultural historian. As such, the changes in people's attitudes over time fascinate me. I often find myself revisiting the European witch craze, a period that's so shocking it seems fictional. The very mention of the witch trials probably conjures up images of misogyny, torture and mass burning, but it's incredibly complicated and varies greatly over the century and from nation to nation. Which brings me to one of the most unusual witch trials that I came across in my studies, the Icelandic Witchtrials, which saw 10 women being taken to court, whilst the other 120 were men. Out of the burnings, 22 men lost their lives, and only 1 woman, which is strikingly different to the rest of Europe. Although Iceland became a Christian country in 1000 AD, it still had strong ties to its pagan past. Magic and religion mingled on the island for centuries. There was a strange balance between using Christian prayer for help and guidance, but using magic to improve their earthbound state. Sorcerers often even had a position of respect in their communities. These pagan traditions are fascinating in themselves, using runes, ritual and symbols that invoke nature and spiritualism, but not deities as they used to, in order to compensate for the new Christian beliefs in the country. Staves in particular were very common. They were symbols that a person would carry to preserve things like health, luck, or make them invincible in battle. However, as the 16th century dawned, there was a shift. Like the rest of Europe, religious reform was shaping new ideas of what was right and wrong in the faith. Iceland was under the control of the Norway and Denmark Union. Denmark had blossomed into a strongly Protestant state, and by 1564 the religious authority of Copenhagen was sick of the pagan customs of Iceland and issued a decency law, which began to crack down on all things unchristian. Throughout Europe, magic had become classified as an evil thing, an instrument of the devil and his will, and only good for causing harm, or more commonly referred to as maleficia. But in Iceland, where sorcery was such a part of everyday life and commonly practiced, this caused confusion and suspicion. Men who had once been famous and well respected were now potentially dangerous. The first trial that ended in execution took place in 1625. Magnus Bjornsson, a bailiff educated in Copenhagen, arrived in a town to study some strange events that had been happening. Many had become sick and livestock had been killed off. Allegedly, it was a young boy suffering from the illness who first pointed out John Rognvaldsson as a suspect. Upon searching his house, runes were found, which John confessed to having written. Upon further questioning, Rognvaldsson admitted to having tried to raise the dead in order to get revenge on a neighbour. However, his magic was poorly handled and he was not skilled enough, resulting in an uncontrolled zombie who just terrorised the whole neighbourhood. Because of the nature of the runes found in Rognvaldsson's home and the events around the town, he was accused of having tried to raise the dead in order to get revenge on the town. However, he was deemed unintelligent and not capable of passing off the spell fully and having control of this zombie that he raised. Therefore, it was simply terrorising the town out of his control. Rognvaldsson would deny these claims vehemently, and his brother backed him up. It was not enough, and he was the first man executed for witchcraft in Iceland. So let's step back for a moment and consider why men may have been persecuted more than women in the Icelandic witch trials. The first thing we might consider is the very culture of magic in Iceland. Magic was largely practiced by educated men who could read and write, because it was essential to read the grimoires, which were the magic textbooks which contained knowledge of the runes and staves used in magic rituals. Therefore, the image of a sorcerer as a man was already in the minds of the public when they thought of witches. Add to this the lack of sexual elements in the confessions from those convicted. It's wholly removed from the idea of female sexuality being present in the European trials. One could also argue that population made a difference. Unlike many European countries, Iceland's population was comparatively smaller. Because of this, communities tended to be very tight-knit. Although we see many trials in Iceland, we see very few executions, due to many being acquitted thanks to the testament of their community. Despite this, Iceland's trials would continue for the next few decades. However, there was a 29-year gap between Rognvaldsson's trial and the next one. By this time, European trials were declining in number, yet Iceland's were growing. This is likely from the increased Christian presence in Iceland and the growing propaganda from the continent. This theme is certainly present in the Icelandic Witchtrials of 1654. Many of the community were falling ill, sprouting from one woman in particular who'd been working for the farmer Thordur Gudbrandsson. This woman had been a domestic servant to Gudbrandsson and claimed that he mistreated her during her service. She left because of this abuse, and subsequently fell ill shortly after. The community naturally assumed that he may have something to do with her illness as a form of revenge. Upon interrogation, Gudbrandsson admitted to these crimes. His confession is interesting, as it starts to mirror some European themes that we see in continental trials. In his confession, Gudbrandsson claims to have met the devil, who was masquerading as a fox at the time, and made a deal with him so that he would inflict this illness upon his enemies. Because of this, Gudbrandsson became the second man to burn for witchcraft. However, suspicion was still rife in the community, and this trial would take 2 more lives. Often, when people are accused of witchcraft, they end up implicating other people, either by their own design or the force of their interrogators. This was certainly the case for Gudbrandsson. As he was being taken to his execution, Gudbrandsson implicated Grimur Johnson as one of the most powerful sorcerers in the town. It's unknown whether he did this out of pressure or panic, but it did lead to Grimur's death. This accusation may have some reality to it. Grimur Johnson may well have been a traditional sorcerer forced into hiding thanks to the trials, however was well known to the community and an easy target. Grimur Johnson burned the very next day. The last man to die in Icelandic would be Egil Bjarnason, who had been accused of murdering livestock with the use of magic. He confessed to having met the devil in very much the same manner as Gudbrandsson and was burned the next day. Another common theme in the witch trials is that of distrust of those outside the community. This is seen in my final example of an Icelandic witch trial. Páll Oddsson lived in relative isolation on his farm outside Ansalot, but when his wife became sick, he called in a reverend, who didn't take too kindly to finding runes in his home. The reverend accused Oddsson of having made his own wife sick with the magic. One can imagine that these runes may have been used innocently as Oddsson's attempt to try and heal his wife. However, Oddsson's assumed guilt was only made worse when he didn't attend the debate concerning his case in court. The governor went ahead and imprisoned Oddsson in the home of Gudbrandur Arngrimsson, a local magistrate. Whilst imprisoned in the magistrate's home, rumours of Oddsson's guilt only grew in the community, and it was only made worse when the magistrate himself believed Oddsson was having an affair with his wife. Perhaps his wife showed him common kindness and decency during his time imprisoned. We may never know. Regardless, the rumours grew even more, and everyone assumed Oddsson was a deviant of some sort, and suspected that these crimes had legitimacy. By the time Oddsson's trial rolled round, it became evident that many of the townsfolk had turned against him. He started off with 12 defenders, but 5 of them dropped out from the legal proceedings. Although Oddsson never confessed, he was convicted and sentenced to burn at the stake. Oddsson's trial in particular demonstrates how communities could turn against outsiders in times of uncertainty. It all sounds grim, but this is again where Iceland differs from Europe. The cultural significance of pagan rituals and sorcery doesn't fizzle out. There remains a strong connection to it even in the modern day. Modern Icelanders still celebrate traditional pagan ceremonies corresponding with festivals that take place throughout the year, such as Thorrabold taking place in January to celebrate personal bonds with those you care for. You can still buy runes and staves to this day, and there is an active pagan society in the country. And preserving these stories and culture is the Museum of Witchcraft and Sorcery. It tells the story of the native beliefs and the witch trials. Their website hosts a great deal of primary sources and artefacts, and it was a priceless help in this study. I recommend visiting it, and I will link it in the description below. However, maybe brace yourself if you check out Necropants.